So welcome everyone to another Voices with Vervaeke. I'm really pleased here I get to introduce a bunch of you to somebody who does some really valuable work for me in support of my work. It's Lorcan McSharp, sorry, and he is the person responsible for doing my short videos. Some of you might have seen the really impressive one that we released over the Christmas holidays, the Christmas break. And Lorcan is here because I mean, he's supporting my work, and he does these short videos and talk a bit about that. But for him, this is not just work or even interest. There's a bit of a vocation for him. It's part of a larger calling that he is engaged in right now. And so I thought it'd be a good idea for people to meet him and to hear his story and to see what he's hoping to do in helping people awaken from the meaning crisis, to coin a phrase you might have heard before. So welcome, Lorcan. It's good to see you.
It's great to be here, John. Thanks for having me on.
So, I mean, you sent me a video that I reviewed, and it made me aware of sort of a journey you've been on, and maybe it would be really helpful to start with that journey. And so how do you sort of hear and why you reached out to me, because you reached out to me, and you know, why you're making the shorts for myself and for Jordan. So fill us in a bit. How did you get here, and what's going on for you right now?
Yeah, so my life, I suppose, has been a bit of a dance, battle, combination of the two around trying to free myself from the things that I perceive as putting me in a box. And,
right,
and you, Jordan, have talked about those things at great length, and this nature of a kind of alienation from culture, from society, and an acute awareness of that alienation, and wondering, where is this coming from? How real is this? How much of this comes from myself? How much of this is a genuine threat outside of me?
Right.
And the kind of biggest breakthrough moment has been a couple of years ago when I decided to not go the college route, the traditional school route. And just a small story around that. There was in the school newspaper, there was all the colleges that people are going to be going to, a list of all of them. Right. And there was one little section that said other at the end, and it was just my name.
Oh.
So it was this kind of encapsulation of this fact that there's all these people flooding into the traditional way of doing things. And then there's me trying something different. And on that journey, there's been a lot of ups and downs and confusion that brought me towards your and Jordan's and this space in general, because it seemed like there was an answering of some of those questions, like, oh, the meaning crisis, the things that your elaboration on how there's different sections of what gives you meaning, what gives you that, how you're mattering, and how you're and meaning and purpose and all those things, and how it's not just that purpose, and that great purpose was kind of the thing that I had my eye on. But when you're in this place where you're young and you don't have anything together, and there's no institution to funnel you through, there's a kind of there's a lack of a foundation of that.
Right.
So I suppose what I'm exploring is, how can one build themselves up from themselves, from this place of a shaky foundation. And so what comes up when I say all that for you?
Well, what comes up was a bit of a critique that you put in your previous video, because I think what you said is going to trigger something that is somewhat culturally familiar to many people, which is sort of the self-help movement. And you pointed out that you got involved with that, but you found out that that was really just sort of a negation of the state you were in before, and it wasn't actually getting you where you wanted to be. So I think it would be helpful if you address that.
Yes, so that video is on, it's called Self-Help is Cool, but It Might Break Your Heart. And it's
great title.
Thank you. Thank you. And it's kind of an elaboration on how I went from this place of being quite politically active in 2016, 2015,
Right.
and how from there I kind of dove into projecting out all these things that I perceived wrong with the world, and I got pulled in through podcasting, and specifically through Jordan Peterson, into this. Oh, I'm also doing that. I'm
Right.
the victim. I am myself, kind of being broken down into this place where I'm the one who's has to take full accountability.
Personal responsibility kind of thing.
Personal responsibility. And that really captured my attention because it was the opposite of what I was doing.
Right.
And then that kind of flooded me down into lots of other people. And that slowly built up this kind of reverse projection.
Right.
Everything was my fault.
Right.
And I myself was responsible for every single, I suppose, thing that I was doing wrong, that I coined doing wrong. When really kind of it goes into the end of this video and comes to a place of there's nothing really wrong here. There's damage, there's pain.
Right.
And putting that outwards and putting that inwards has the same effect, where it's just avoiding the initial kind of hole, that it's a cliche of the hole that's never filled.
Right.
And how self-help was acting as that. It was acting as an addiction of some sorts. And it was deceiving me.
Did you get into, like, it sounds almost a little bit like Luther. Did you get into a place of like almost self-loathing at some point? Like
during this whole process, a lot of the underlying emotions were completely invisible to me.
Oh.
And that's why it's kind of hard to talk about, really, because there's so much of it is, I've noticed how much I am building stories around these ideas and around these feelings. Right. So when I talk about it, I go, is that true?
Right.
Or is that just more of the woven, tangled story that brought me to this place to begin with? Right. So there's confusion here, and I'm coming to the point where I'm like, oh, it's okay. It's okay to be confused. It's okay to feel these things, and it's okay to feel, that was one of them for sure. Self-loathing, just this externalized screw culture,
right?
And flipping and going, oh, it must be me,
right?
Wow. And there's yeah.
So, like, what broke you out of the like, I get it. They're sort of locked into each other. One is just the negation of the other. They're just locked in like that. What broke you out of that sort of inward spiral, if I can put it that way? Like what woke you up from it?
So it was actually a breakup.
You were in a relationship and you broke up with someone. Yeah.
Yeah. That really, I suppose, brought my attention to the way that my internalized viewpoints were externalizing.
Oh, right.
So it wasn't about personal responsibility. It was about, it's, and this isn't a critique of the ideas themselves. It's the way in which they fitted to me.
Right, I get that. That's good.
And the way in which they fitted to me was within a bubble.
Right.
So all this development was me hibernating.
Right.
Getting ready to come back out again. But before I could, I saw that I wasn't in a bubble.
Right.
And that everything I was doing was coming outside of me. And I kind of knew that all along. So it's an odd dynamic, really. And I wonder if you've had you know, your work delves into these kind of things
Yeah.
in one way or another. So I'm wondering if that for you comes from a personal place also.
It comes from a personal place, and it also comes from a philosophical place, and the two come together. Um, in the work of somebody you've heard me mention in this series who had a deep influence on me, Paul Tillich. And Tillich does this thing where he talks about a kind of inevitable existential tension between these two poles that both have to be satisfied, but they pull in opposite directions from each other. And one is individuation, which he means that very much in a Jungian sense. And one is participation, and he means that very much in like Buber's sense of the I thou relation, belonging to something outside of yourself, committing to something bigger than yourself. And Tillich talks about the fact that if we spend too long in one pole, we start to long for the other pole. If we participate too much, the need for individuation has not been met, and so there'll be a countervailing drive. But if we individuate too much, we long for the world, and we long to be connected to something outside, and so we're pulled back. And how that sort of impacts my life, or how that points to things that impact my life, is I very much, especially with somebody who wrestles with social phobia and attachment in the psychological sense, not the Buddhist sense, and attachment issues. I've seen that dynamic play out very, very powerfully in my own life. And you almost like tides coming in and out, sort of existential tides of my life have been flowing. And trying to get that, Tillich talks about the possibility of sort of a creative tension, a tonos, Tonos, between these, which I think, I'd have to make it more of an argument for this, but I think is sort of similar to what I talk about when I talk about opponent processing, getting them, although they're pulling in different directions, getting them fundamentally bound to each other and bound together to an overarching project of ongoing self-correction, ongoing adaptivity. And so that's sort of the project, and I'm engaging in it very personally right now, therapeutically, existentially, philosophically, spiritually, about trying to getting that tearing turned into, opponent processing.
Yeah, what's coming to mind is kind of an image of two. It's almost like a double helix.
Yes.
And
yeah.
there's the two strands, and they can so easily just turn into a knot. But
Yes.
you really want that, like, you want them to be perfectly knotted so that they can become kind of a rope.
Yeah.
And that's something strong, right? That's something you can hold on to.
Nice.
And climb up. So
that's very nice. I see why you're doing the thumbnails and the short videos for me. That's a very good translation into a pictorial metaphor. That's very good. Yes, I like that. Yeah.
Yeah, and well, it's an image that's been. So I presented it. I said it's a battle and a dance,
right?
And that seems to be the theme of it, because it maybe it is somehow both,
right?
And maybe one of them is aggressive and one of them is masculine, feminine. It's these two chaos order. It's put in so many different ways. For me, it comes in the domain of control and surrender,
right?
And the playing out of letting things happen, but while making them happen, making yourself let things happen. It's very tricky.
Yeah, I've been trying to get across that with these two interrelated ideas of transjectivity as the relation and participation, because in participation, we're neither acting on the world, sort of like, in a romantic fashion, or just, receiving the world in kind of a passive empiricist fashion, but in fact, we're transjectively bound to it in a dynamical coupling. Yeah, I've been that's why those ideas are very central to my work. I'm trying to get people to find that place, and that's why I'm so critical of the people say I over criticize the romantics, but if they pay attention, I criticize the romantics and the empiricists often together, right? I criticize the blank slate of the empiricist and the blank canvas of the world of romanticism, and instead we have to think about participation in a transjectivity as a more appropriate way, both of recognizing how we live and affording how we can live more wisely.
Okay, so break down the romantic worldview for me.
I mean, so it's a complex worldview, but the basic idea of Romanticism is the idea of the imagination's capacity to create meaning and we use this word a lot, to express, to press out, to express it on the world. And that the world is basically there, almost empty of any meaning or any structures or any limitations, so that we can just express our meaning onto the world. And empiricism is the other. It's that the world is completely sort of a finished entity, ontologically finished. And what it does is my mind is basically a blank slate, and I just passively receive the information from the world, and that's how meaning comes to me. And I've been arguing throughout all of the Awakening for the Meaning Crisis that those two modes radically misrepresent our relationship to the world and also how meaning is made. And the thing about them is they are the two dominant modes in our culture right now.
Yeah.
And they're locked together, right? And they need each other because they define each other in contrast to each other.
What's coming to mind is the self-help world.
Right.
Because there's two ways of going about it. There's you need to get up at this time and do all these habits in the morning and fix your morning routine and do this before you go to sleep. And it's like a series of habits.
Right.
And there's you don't need to do anything. You're the creator of your own world. Like everything's coming to you at divine timing, and everything will be okay. And all you have to do is think about it. And there are these two, and this is what happens to my algorithm, my YouTube algorithm. It is filled with one person saying, you need to wake up at 6:30, and the other person saying, wake up whenever you need to, because it's who you are. So it's this sculpting, and that like you're making something, a sculpture of some kind, and someone's shouting in your ear over here telling you to make it look this way, and the other person's telling you to make it look this way, and it just ends up
right.
Yeah, it's both a horse and a human, but it's not quite a centaur. And so what do you propose is the way of being where you can take in both without taking in both?
Yeah, so I mean, I think there's a continuum, and I try and outline that in the series and lay it out. You know, and Daniel Gregg and I talk about this continuum going from like optimal grip through to insight to flow to, you know, transformative experiences to awakening experiences, potentially to enlightenment. But the theme throughout is that, right, that capacity to get into a participatory relationship that's exemplified by things like the flow state. In the flow state, you are at one and the same time, you're highly active. You're putting in a lot of effort. You can feel that metabolically usually, but it's paradoxical because it's often called effortless effort. So although you're putting in all this, you also feel like the world is coming to meet you. It's disclosing itself to you, right? So there's this at one-ment. You are both you're both highly active and you're highly receptive, and they're forming this dynamical coupling, cycling with the world. So you're dynamically at one with the world. And we find that experience the most rewarding, both in the sense that we really enjoy it, and it's where we do our best performance. It's where our agency is at its fullest. And this also sounds paradoxical, even though our sort of egocentric narrative, it drops away. Right? Yeah. And so those states are states that are particularly conducive to enhancing insight, intuition, optimal grip, and training, you know, a lot of the capacities that go into making one wiser. And they seem to contribute also to people's sense of connectedness, meaning in life. So trying to get people to remember how to get onto that continuum and get into these states, not just as sort of wonderful experiences they have, but as in terms of an overall process of education by which they get an optimal grip. They get that, they turn that tearing, as I said, into an ongoing adaptive opponent processing.
Okay. So you're going into the flow state,
yeah.
and you're engaging with the world, and you're seeing things in a place where the helix is a helix, and it's coming together, and you're like, oh, everything makes sense. Is there a tension that can be created by being so in the zone, so in that flow state, where you put the flow state on a pedestal?
Yeah.
When you're out of it, you know so clearly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So let me talk about that in two ways. The first thing is, it's not just the flow state. I'm talking about any state. The way we get into participation is when we get into reciprocal opening, where I'm sort of structuring myself so with cognitive flexibility, so the world discloses itself more to me, right? And then that allows me to, again, further restructure myself, get more fitted to the world. And it's like when you're falling in love with somebody, there's that reciprocal opening. So it's more generally that phenomena that I think puts you into proper participation. Now, the specific question about flow, and I talked about this yesterday when I was at Rebel Wisdom as part of their sense-making course. So the way to talk about that is to relate a bit of a personal story that I use when I'm teaching my students. So I've been doing Tai Chi Chuan religiously for about 2 or 3 years. And I was getting into the flow state while I was doing it. It was all wonderful and I was enjoying it. But then my fellow grad students came to me and they said, what are you doing? What's going on? And at first I was like, oh no. And then I said, what do you mean? And they said, well, you're changing. You're much more balanced and flexible in your presentation of ideas and your argumentation and discourse. And I hadn't realized how much the practice was sort of permeating through all of my cognition. And it was becoming very pervasive. Often, I wasn't conscious of that. And so much so that I often recommend to my students when they ask me, well, how am I know if I'm on the path well? And I'll say, when other people who don't know you're doing the practice notice consistent patterns of change in you, that's a way of getting good feedback. And I noticed that, and I've done some work with some people about this. It's like, you want to make sure, and this goes towards, wise flow. You want to make sure that you're flowing in circumstances and conditions and in a manner that will actually afford it permeating through your life. So I often hold up as contrast Taoism and video games. Taoism figured out ways of doing this, doing these movements and practices, and in putting it within an overall philosophy and ecology of practice, so it permeates your life like this. And video games typically do not do that. In fact, they typically do the opposite. They can. I'm not saying it's absolutely impossible. I'm talking about typically. Typically, for most people, they entomb people, and we get what's called the virtual exodus. People, like, they are fleeing from the real world into the virtual reality where they find all the meaning missing, where they find all the missing meaning structures. And when that's happening, your flow state, although you're getting a local flow state, you're actually disconnecting right from the world in general. So you want more the Taoist model than the video game model. You want to choose where, when, how, and in what kind of ecology of practices, the home, right, within which you're finding flow, such that it germinates and permeates through your life.
Permeates through your life. Yeah. You're not locked into where the meaning is coming from. It's something that stems out of every moment. It's when you go on a walk and you notice the flowers.
Yes.
Versus thinking about this purpose-driven quest that you have, that you don't see anything around you.
Yeah, exactly. You can get locked in, that locks you out from the very connections you're seeking with yourself, with each other, with the world. Exactly.
Mm. And it's fascinating what you said about people seeing the differences outside of you,
Yes.
because in that place there is a reciprocal open. There is the people are opening up to you because they see you in a different light.
Exactly. That's well said. That's well said,
Mm.
Lorcan. That's well said.
Thank you. Yeah, I've been doing the circling practice recently. I took a
Excellent.
workshop a couple
Yeah.
of weeks ago, and it's really brought me into awareness about how I wasn't listening
Yeah.
properly,
Yeah.
really listening, really being there, really paying attention, and I'm noticing myself sometimes in this conversation, um, thinking of something to say, and in the past I would have held onto that thing, locked onto it in the same way that you might
Right.
lock onto a
Right.
meaning,
And you
and
lose
then
presence. Yeah.
lose presence, and then not listen to the rest of it, and then jump back, and then it's like this weird wonky like getting
Yeah.
back to the
Yeah.
getting back into
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Whereas when I let myself let that go, if it was important, it comes right back.
Yes.
And if it wasn't, it's gone. It's okay. The new thing will be more affording to you
Yeah.
because it's in this present moment.
Yeah. Learning to trust your trained relevance realization machinery is a very important thing to do. And also, just to second response, circling is an example of what I was talking about before. Circling,
Mm.
you get into the flow state. You get into the flow state with other people, but you get it into you get it within a context and a situation that easily germinates and permeates through your life, because it has to do with conversation, personal interaction, encountering other people. Yeah, I think Guy Senstock's circling is, I think it's a work of genius. It's a brilliant psychotechnology that does help to create flow in a way that spreads and informs the rest of your life and potentially transforms the rest of your life. So that's a good
Yeah.
example. That's a good example.
Mm. Mm. And there is, it's interesting because I can feel it downloading into me
Mhm.
slowly.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And it's the what you talk about with the propositional and the participatory.
Right.
Whereas sometimes, like, because I'm new to it, I know about it propositionally. I know it in my head. I
Yeah,
know what
yeah,
it is to be in that place. Yet sometimes I'll be in a conversation with my family, and because there's more, we know each other more in that way, and that you're more comfortable around your family, it's more easy for you to let yourself slip.
yes,
So there's a new thing that's happening, and I'm noticing it now in this context of the self-help world, which is applying things you're not you I applying things to other people when it comes to love. I don't love you until you get your act together. I don't love
right,
you
right,
until you do it.
yeah,
That's the unconscious kind of effect that has on other people.
right, 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 right.
I'm noticing that flip to I don't love you until you listen to me.
No, I see.
I don't love you until you're healed. And I'm like, oh no, it's happening again.
Right, 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 right,
But that's okay because it's the awareness is there, whereas
right.
it wasn't before. But it's the same way that these positive forms of
Of course.
flow and can misdirect. They can misfire.
Yeah, that's an excellent connection. I agree with that. That's a very good connection.
Thank you. Yeah, I I suppose what we're all looking for is well, not all of us, but many of us in this space is the place where it's not just presence, it's presence with yourself and openness to the other. And
Yeah,
it's a consistent
yes,
place and very difficult.
yes,
It's a balancing act, right?
it is. It's that we're back to that balancing act between individuation and participation again. Um,
Yeah.
and I guess the thing that can be helpful to people is, talking about this is kind of tricky, but this goes to a lot of the work that I do with Christopher and with Guy and with Jordan Hall and Peter Lindbergh, and is that that process, that dynamical system of sort of reciprocal opening and getting, that creative tonos between, participating in others and individuating, and right, you get to a place where, because people often start using very religious and spiritual language in circling, because they start to get a sense of the dynamical system itself. People call it the we space. I sometimes call it the logos. You get a sense of the actively present collective intelligence of the dynamical system as something above and beyond your intelligence plus my intelligence, etc. And that, and I'm going to use this word very carefully. I'm going to use it like in a Talikian sense. That's very encouraging. It motivates you, but it also gives you a kind of courage to deal with a lot of the ways in which we have been wounded. And we get into this weird state where we crave an intimacy of relation and we are equally hostile to it. And trying to get the encouragement that breaks us out of that is also something that people should look forward to in these kinds of practices.
Yes.
It can help them, because initially you're sort of pushing into the practice, but what will happen is you'll get a place where it flips, and it's much more that you're being drawn along by the practice than pushing into it.
Yeah. Looking forward to it.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's something really interesting about that phrase, looking forward to it, and the courage and how these play into that, right? And I'm imagining this balancing act being on a tightrope in, big long distance down, right?
Yeah.
So you do need courage, and you do need to look forward to getting to the other side. But it's nerve-wracking.
It is.
And within that anxiety, there was something Guy said. It was the capacity to be in a relationship, the capacity to really get someone, is to be intimate with yourself, intimate with them. And he says it better than I do. But it was being in anxiety. The capacity to be in the anxiety is what increases the intimacy. Which is the relation.
Because Guy talks a lot about a kind of transformation, and it's a perspectival and even participatory transformation you have to engage in. So he talks about that anxiety, and he'll often use the term exposure. And think about the person on the high wire and how exposed they feel, right?
Yeah.
And then he says, what can happen with good practice in this practice is you can get that shift where you go from seeing it as exposure to seeing it as vulnerability. And what he means by that, I think, and I'm in regular conversation with Guy, and the way I've been talking about it recently is, right, you're reshaping this space of exposure into, right, instead of it being sort of a lack or a threat, it is now reconfigured as an open, like as a sensitive receptivity. Right? What you've done is, it's like, so what he means is the anxiety can be transformed is if the exposure can be transformed into vulnerability, such that you start to appreciate the openings in you, because that's what exposure is, as actually apertures through which you can sort of see beyond the prison wall of your own ego and potentially see people more as they are, or perhaps, if you'll allow me to extend the metaphor, reach through those gaps and potentially come into a more intimate contact with them. So I think that's what he means by this process of, if you have good faith engagement in the practice, it will actually transform exposure into vulnerability. And then that will really afford us getting out of this block where we crave intimacy. And it's also the thing we most fear at the same time.
Yeah. It's like those holes, right? You've got the holes here and the holes in the other person, and that you're picturing it so that the holes match up.
They line up.
beam of
yeah,
light just goes straight through, and you both see people see past each other, behind their ego, behind everything that they're portraying.
yeah,
It's the reality of the person and all their everything that they've been through. And you go, oh my God, you are the same as me. You have struggles, grief, all these
yeah.
things. And maybe it's not that, maybe it's not to the same extent, but it feels the same. I think there was a conversation between you and Jordan where it's like Jordan said, I don't know your grief, but I know grief.
Yes, exactly, exactly. Another image very analogous to the one you just used is getting the two mirrors, and the mirrors are open, right?
Mm,
Got to get them so that they are properly aligned, and then you get the the infinities going in both directions because of
wow.
that resonance. Yeah, and then the thing about it, if you'll allow me that metaphor, it's also in your beam of light, is that not only discloses the two people in depth, it discloses the depth of being itself.
Yeah, yeah. Discloses the depth of being itself. Yeah. Because it is that place of confusion
Yeah,
in front of clarity.
yeah, yeah,
And then you're like, oh, everything is clear. And if everything is clear with you and everything is clear with me, then everything must be clear.
it helps. It does that. It
Yeah.
really. So one way Chris and I talk about it, Christopher Mastropietro and I, is there's the three intimacies in things like circling. You get intimate with yourself, and as you said with Guy, that intimacy with yourself is coupled to the intimacy with the other. And then there's a third thing. You become, both of you together and individually, become intimate with the process of intelligibility itself.
Mm. Break that down for me. The process of intelligibility.
So what you're doing is, so for example, when people ask me about dialectic and Dialogos, one of the ways I talk about it is we get into that right relationship, that dynamical coupling, so that you get to a place you couldn't get to on your own, and I get to a place where I couldn't get to on my own. And what that does is we're sort of, we have sort of coupled insight machinery going like
Mm-hmm.
this. And of course that opens you up, it opens me up, but insight, that you also act as a mirror for me and I act as a mirror for you. We're also seeing the process itself reflected in the other person, and we're reflecting it to each other. So we become more and more aware of how this meaning making is working, and the levels and the complexity, and we get an increasing sense, an explicit focal awareness of the sense of it, of the presence of it, and then we start to feel an intimacy with that process, not just with ourselves and with each other.
Mm. Yeah. And it the words that have been coming to my mind, I'm seeing them. Of confusion is one that's
Yes.
big,
Yeah.
and it's interesting that that is a repeating thing. But
Yeah.
within that and behind that, again, the clarity behind that, with reality itself, you're seeing reality itself. You're seeing the flow. You're seeing the way we can couple together,
Yeah.
and
So,
and it's not in your mind.
no,
It's
no.
somewhere else, and it completely, the confusion just evaporates
Yeah,
because you're out of that place and you're into this. You're into the engagement.
exactly. You're not confused anymore, right? Things have been pulled apart into proper relation so that they light each other up, to pick up on your light metaphor.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Wow. Yeah. Yeah. And that is the, well, it's easy for me to go, that is the answer to what I'm looking for.
Yeah,
Right.
I think that's a little too simple. Yeah.
It
Uh,
is so too simple. And that doesn't need to be an answer around it, because it's a continual.
But the way I would put it is the way we were talking about earlier, right? You want to be able to get that in a way that germinates and permeates through your life. So perennial patterns and idiosyncratic patterns of self-deception and self-destruction are
Mhm.
ameliorated, and your ability to connect yourself to the world and to other people is afforded. I mean, so you right, it's the answer if it is wisely cultivated into an awakening, right, as opposed to just gathering these sort of wonderful experiences. But like I said, they have to be wisely curated and cultivated so that they permeate into an awakening experience, in which you're getting sort of freedom from and healed from, right? So there's this sort of retrospective therapeutic aspect. You're getting freedom from and healing from the ways those self-deceptive, self-destructive patterns have cut you and wound you and cut you off. And then you also get a prospective affordance of aspiration, how you can connect to, you know, a more virtuous self in a more, right, in a more meaningful, deeper world.
Mm, mm. Yeah, the pieces of the pie, whether they be nutrition and exercise and therapy and work and social life and intimacy and all these things, they they stop being individual parts of your life, and they start coming together like the planets coming together kind of thing.
Yeah.
And in that, the clarity isn't this is the answer you were looking for, and now listen to this and you will be fine. It's stay here.
Yeah, very much. Like when Jordan and I are talking about the idea of the sacred as a continuity of contact with the way
Yeah.
in reality is an inexhaustible source of new intelligibility, new connection, etc.
Mm,
Yes.
yeah, balancing, staying on that line.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's say you've got someone now who is in the position that I was in, who but sees this, but they don't, it's not clear. They just have a feeling, right? That
Mm-hmm.
something that they can get to this space, and that when they do, things will usually work out. The alignment within will probably align
Mm.
outside. And I think within your experience and mine, that is what tends to happen.
Yes.
So if they have been wounded and they have been damaged by culture, and things have put them in this place where they are, the planets are all over the place and the holes don't line up with anyone, what do they do?
Cultivate an ecology of practices that has at least three pivotal poles to it. One is practices of self-correction, not in the self-help sense, but in the sense of becoming intimately aware of your patterns of self-deceptive behavior.
Mm-hmm.
You need to have practices of healing that are designed to explicitly get you to engage with the ways you've been wounded and bring about, well, healing, bring about a reintegration, or bring about a restructuring. Different therapeutic modalities have different language, and I don't want to privilege anyone, but you want a self-correcting, but also, right. But again, I'm not quite happy with that word because it sounds puritanical, but I mean in the sense of something that really affords you becoming aware of self-deceptive patterns. You want the healing pole, the therapeutic, and then you want an aspirational set of practices that are designed to afford you self transcendence, afford you enhancing meaning in life, enhancing connectedness. And you want to get them in complementary relationships with each other, checks and balances. Don't worry about your belief system right now. I mean, don't adopt weird conspiracy theories or anything like that, because, right, concentrate more on the perspectival participatory changes, and then read the philosophy broadly construed, but try and read good stuff that helps with that continuity of contact, helps you to get to the place where you're not so much pushing into your ecologies of practices as you are being drawn into them, and they are unfolding around you.
Yes, yes. Wow. Okay, so within that place, there's so my most recent circling event was a Thursday, and the insight I came to was that I had seen this and seen that I was pushing, and in that place I'd gone, oh my God, this is exhausting.
Right.
I'm putting myself together and I'm finding all these wounds. I'm finding all these things that I'm trying to heal, and it is exhausting. Sometimes it's okay to just sit on the side of the road and look back at all the progress you've made.
You
And
should. You should.
Yeah.
When I'm teaching people, the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha, you definitely need the Dharma, you need the teaching, and you need the Sangha, you need the community. But you also need the Buddha. You need to celebrate, recognize, and you got to do this very balanced, right? Because
Yes.
you can get into narcissism, right? You have to sort of the middle path between narcissism and being puritanical. You have to, and this is the metaphor that I use. It's a Buddhist metaphor. You have to befriend yourself. You have to befriend. How would you relate to a beloved friend, right? You don't inflate them, and but you're not puritanical with them. You try to get them into right relationship with themselves, right? You're doing the same thing with yourself. And what you want to do is the Buddha part. And I'm not trying to make anybody a Buddhist, right? But what that means is those, remember and encourage yourself with those moments where your Buddha nature, or maybe it's the Christ within you, or the sage within, whichever works for you, because I'm not committed to one of these having exclusive claims, theoretical claims, right? You celebrate it and you realize it in both senses. You become aware of it, and you also help to actualize it, make it a more real factor within your psyche. Yes, you need to do that. You need to, and we do this like, you think about it in religious ritual, we have times where we just properly celebrate those things, those things in our life that are supporting us and guiding us. The moments another metaphor that's used in the Buddhist tradition is you're watering your little Buddha. It's like you have these seeds and you don't overwater them because you'll kill them, but you don't underwater them or you'll kill them. You water them appropriately because you're trying to grow that. Because you're trying to grow into, and that's what I mean by the aspirational pole. You have to understand that sometimes stepping back and watering your Buddha is as important to your aspiration as trying to take the next step on the journey.
Yes. Stepping back and watering your Buddha. That is a great way to put it. Wow.
Thank you.
Yeah. And it's what I noticed is that there was a flip. There was a flip in, okay, let's celebrate a little bit too much. And then it's like, okay. And then we're back on the pole. We're back into the balance.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's good though. Whereas in the past, it used to be, oh no, I've fallen off the path.
Right.
But there's a real importance in the fact that the falling off of the path is the very thing that gets you back onto it.
Exactly. This is a very complex dynamical skill. And this is why Tai Chi Chuan and other things, or riding a bike or you have to learn it. You have to weave between until you pick up that very, very, that very sensitive sense of finesse that weaves you closer and closer right into. But even when we're walking around, bipedal organisms, we're perpetually falling, even when we think we're standing. It's just that our cerebellum and our brain have picked up how to do this ongoing. That's why when people get damaged and they have to go through rehab, it's actually a challenge. It's actually a challenge. Or if you have a child and you watch them trying to take their first steps, and it's like, how are they ever going to stand? Right? They're just going to fall over no matter what.
Oh, why standing?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Yeah. And there's the, I think it's defined by being lost, this restricted, what my video is about. It's defined by permanently trying to fix your posture, wherein that you're going inside yourself and you're going, oh, my back isn't perfectly aligned and my shoulders aren't back, and I need to be sitting. And in going into that place, I lose you. And I'm back into me, and I'm restricting myself, and I'm perfectly trying to sit properly. Whereas if I'm really engaged in the conversation, I might come down and I might not have good, I relax into it.
When I'm teaching people meditation and I'm teaching them posture, I don't tell them to take it. I actually have them go through this exercise where they close their eyes and feel themselves forward and back, and they slowly go in until they feel aligned with gravity, and then they can relax into it. That's how I teach them to find their posture.
I'm going to do that from now on. That's a fantastic way of looking at it, because otherwise it is that idea of, I know where I'm going.
Yes.
I'm going to plop myself into it, and then I'm going to be enlightened.
I talk about people, I use the language of finding your center rather than making your center.
Yeah. Find your center.
Yeah,
Wow.
I get people to do this way. So if you go on like meditating with John Vervaeke, lesson 1, this way, then this axis, and how to find your center.
Because I made this video a couple weeks back where I asked people, and it's all within this theme: do we make life happen, or do we let life happen? And it's, you find your center, you find life happening.
Yeah, exactly.
You discover life happening, and it's a mixture of both.
That's why I've been trying to really resurrect, and I got this from Philip Carey in his book on Augustine, this Latin word inventio, which means to simultaneously to discover and to make.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't have an English equivalent, but the Latin word is perfect, inventio.
Inventio. Yeah, I've heard you use that one a couple times.
Yeah.
All right. Well, this was a wonderful talk. I'll give you a little bit of time to get ready for your meeting, and just give you any last words. What would you like to finish this with?
Just again, gratitude to you. I mean, first of all, this was wonderful. Hopefully we can do it again at some point. Yeah, me too. And again, I'm glad I got to know you more, and I can get a sense, like I can more deeply appreciate the good work you're doing and putting together the shorts and the thumbnails, and just thank you for that. That's what I would like to end on, thanking you.
Yeah, thank you, John. It's I was struggling coming into this, how much to thank you, how much to show gratitude, because this whole finding your work and doing these clips has been the education that I've been missing. It's been a really fascinating way of using my time to be educated, to learn, while not being in any school. So thank you for that. And I couldn't, maybe I can find a bunch of professors all over the place and craft my own little school.
Well, I'm glad my work has been helpful to you like that. I wish you good luck in your search.
Yeah, and to you too. So, all right, great talking to you, and I will. Maybe we can do this again.
Take good care. Bye bye.
Take care.
For sure, we'll do it again. Bye bye.
Excellent. Bye bye.